My father is not the kind of man who says I love you. He says it in other ways. In the way he memorized my coffee order when I was 16, in the way he drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help me move into my first apartment, in the way he sat across from me at his kitchen table in Oakville last February and asked, very quietly, why I looked like I hadn't slept in 3 months. I didn't know how to answer him, so I lied. I said I was fine. I'd been saying that for almost 2 years. I met my husband at a work conference in Ottawa. I was 26, working in healthcare administration at a regional hospital, and he was there representing a financial consulting firm out of Calgary. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, effortlessly, almost reflexively, like breathing. He remembered details. He followed up. He sent a handwritten card 2 weeks after we met, which nobody does anymore, and I thought that said something about who he was. We dated long distance for 8 months. He flew to Toronto 4 times in that stretch. I flew to Calgary twice. My father met him once, over dinner at a steakhouse in Burlington, and afterward said only that he seemed like a man who knew exactly what he wanted. I took that as a compliment. I think now he didn't entirely mean it as one. We got engaged in November, married the following June, outdoors, at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake, with 60 guests and white tablecloths, and my grandmother crying in the front row. I wore my mother's earrings. My father walked me down the aisle and held my hand an extra second before he let go. I moved to Calgary. The arrangement with my father started before the wedding, though I didn't fully understand it at the time. My father built a commercial property management company over 30 years. He's not flashy about it. He drives a 10-year-old Volvo and buys his shirts at Mark's work warehouse, and the only luxury he allows himself is a good bottle of scotch on Friday evenings. But the business is substantial, and he had always been clear that what he built was for our family. He called me 3 weeks before the wedding and said he wanted to help us get established. He said he'd be transferring money into a joint account every month. Enough, he said, that I wouldn't have to worry. Enough that I could take time if I wanted to. If we decided to start a family, if I needed to get on my feet in a new city. He didn't tell me the exact amount on that call. He said he'd send the details to my husband to coordinate the logistics since he was handling our accounts. He trusted him to take care of it. He trusted me. I found out the actual number much later. $80,000 a month. I never saw a single dollar of it. The first year of our marriage, I thought we were just being careful. My husband managed our finances. He'd explained early on that it made sense. He worked in finance. He understood investment strategy. He had accounts structured in ways that minimized tax exposure. I understood that. I have a university degree, and I am not naive about money. But I also knew I didn't have his specific expertise, and I thought that was a reasonable division. What I didn't know was that there was no joint account in my name. There was an account he'd set up before we married, and my father's transfers went into it, and I had no access to it, and no knowledge of what was in it or how it was being used. What I had was a debit card he loaded each month, with what he called our household budget. $1,200. Sometimes a little more if I asked. $1,200 a month in Calgary, for groceries and personal expenses, and anything I needed for myself. I stretched it carefully. I bought store brands. I didn't get my hair cut as often as I used to. I told myself this was temporary, that we were being strategic, that we'd have more flexibility once things settled. His mother moved in with us 4 months after the wedding. She came from Red Deer, ostensibly for a short visit after a minor health issue, and then the visit extended, and then extended again, and at some point the guest room became her room, and it was clear she wasn't leaving. She was not unkind, exactly, but she had opinions about how I kept the kitchen, opinions about how I organized the pantry, opinions about the fact that I still worked full-time, when I didn't need to, delivered always in the register of helpful suggestion. She called my workplace schedule inflexible. She said a home runs better when someone is fully present in it. My husband never disagreed with her in front of me. He said she was just old-fashioned. He said she meant well. I believed him more times than I should have. I got pregnant in the 2nd year of our marriage. I was genuinely happy about it. I thought a baby might shift things. Might give me something solid to hold on to. Might make the apartment feel more like mine. My husband seemed happy too, at first. He was attentive for a few months. He came to the early appointments. Then he started traveling more for work. Extended trips. Toronto, Vancouver, sometimes the States. 2 weeks at a stretch, then 3. His mother kept me company, she said. She cooked dinners I didn't ask for, and reminded me not to lift heavy things, and suggested gently that I should rest more and work less. I was 7 months pregnant when I started picking up extra shifts. Our household budget hadn't increased since I became pregnant. I was buying maternity clothes from thrift stores on 17th Avenue. I was calculating whether I could afford a prenatal massage my doctor recommended, because my back had started locking up. I had a moment in the superstore parking lot, sitting in my car with 2 reusable bags, adding up the total in my head before I went in that I want to forget and can't. I told myself there was a reason. I told myself he was managing something I didn't understand. I told myself we would talk about it properly when he was home. He came home with a new watch, a Rolex. I noticed it at dinner and asked about it. He said a client had given it to him as a gift. His mother said that's the kind of thing that happens when you're respected, feel. I nodded and cleared the plates. It was my coworker who said something first. We were eating lunch in the hospital break room in March. And she'd been talking about a seminar she attended on financial literacy for couples. She mentioned, offhand, that she'd been surprised how many women had no idea what was in their household accounts. I said something neutral. She looked at me for a moment and then asked, carefully, if I knew what our savings situation looked like. I said my husband handled that. She didn't say anything else, but she wrote a name on a napkin. A financial counselor she knew, a woman who worked specifically with women navigating complicated money situations, and left it on the table when we went back to our units. I kept the napkin in my jacket pocket for 6 weeks before I called. The counselor asked me questions I didn't have answers to. What financial institution held our joint accounts? What the account numbers were? Whether I had access to any statements? Whether my name appeared on any assets, property, vehicles, investments? I didn't know. She was not alarmed, at least not visibly. She told me that the first step was to gather information, and she walked me through how to do that. She suggested I contact my father, quietly, to understand the terms of the transfers he'd been making. I hadn't talked to my father about money since before the wedding. He'd asked a few times, generally, how we were doing, and I'd said fine. Always fine. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon in April, parked in the hospital parkade with 20 minutes before my shift. I told him I had some questions about the arrangement he'd set up for us before the wedding. I asked him to walk me through it. There was a long pause. He said he'd been sending $80,000 a month since the month we got married. He said he'd coordinated it directly with my husband, who'd assured him the transfers were going into an account we shared. He said he'd assumed, since I'd never mentioned it, that things were going well. I was quiet for a moment. Then I told him I had never, in 22 months of marriage, received $80,000. I had never received anything close to it. I had a household budget of $1,200 a month, and I was buying secondhand maternity clothes while 7 months pregnant, and I didn't know where the money was going. My father didn't raise his voice. He doesn't do that. He just said, "Stay where you are. I'm calling our family lawyer." He called me back 12 minutes later. He had already spoken to the lawyer. He had already contacted his accountant. He told me to do nothing yet, to say nothing to my husband yet, and to trust that he was going to handle this. I sat in that parkade and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in almost 2 years. Not because I was sad, though I was. Because I was so relieved to have someone else know. What the lawyer uncovered took about 3 weeks. The $80,000 a month, just under $2 million over 22 months, had been flowing into an account in my husband's name only, at a financial institution I'd never heard of. From there, money had moved in several directions. A significant portion had gone toward a condominium in Canmore, purchased in his mother's name. Another stream had funded what appeared to be a lifestyle I was not part of: travel, restaurants, a membership at a private club in downtown Calgary. A smaller amount appeared to have gone to an account in my husband's name, at a bank in the Cayman Islands. Though tracing that took longer. His mother's name was on the Canmore property. She had helped him structure it. She hadn't been staying with us to keep me company. She'd been in the apartment to keep an eye on what I knew. My father came to Calgary, the week after the lawyer delivered the full picture. He took a WestJet flight on a Thursday morning, and arrived at the hospital where I worked with a coffee for me. Dark roast, 2 sugars. The same thing he'd ordered for me since I was 16. And waited in the lobby until my break. I came downstairs and saw him standing there in his coat, holding the cup, and I had to stop at the bottom of the staircase for a moment, before I could walk toward him. We sat in the hospital atrium. He handed me the coffee. He looked at me, at my face, at the maternity sweater I'd bought at a consignment store on MacLeod Trail, at the tiredness I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing it, and he said, very quietly, "I should have checked. I should have asked you directly. That's on me." He wasn't looking for absolution. He was stating a fact, the way he states most things. I told him I should have told him sooner. That I'd been too ashamed to say that something was wrong when I couldn't even fully name what it was. He said, "You were surviving. There's no shame in that." Then he put his hand on the table, and I put mine on top of it, and we sat there for a while without saying anything else. My daughter was born in June, 6 weeks after my father came to Calgary. She came early, just slightly, 36 weeks, and she was small but loud, and the first time I held her I understood, with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, that I was done pretending anything was fine. I named her Faye, after my mother's mother, who raised 4 children on a teacher's salary in Sudbury, and never once complained about it. My husband was not at the birth. He was in Vancouver, according to his mother, for work. He arrived 2 days later. He stood at the door of the hospital room, with flowers, good flowers, the expensive kind from a florist, not the grocery store kind, and looked at Faye in my arms and said she was beautiful. I looked at him and felt nothing I could describe as love. My father was in the chair in the corner of the room. My husband noticed him and his expression shifted. Just slightly, just for a second. My father didn't stand up. He just looked at him steadily and said, "We need to talk." They talked in the hallway. I don't know everything that was said. My father told me afterward that he'd informed my husband that the family lawyer had been retained, that the financial records had been fully reviewed, and that the appropriate next steps were being taken. He said my husband had gone pale and then attempted to explain, and that my father had let him finish and then said, simply, "This conversation is over. The next one will be with lawyers present." The divorce took 8 months. It was not clean, but it was complete. The Canmore property was ordered sold, and IPRAIDs were factored into the settlement. The offshore account was identified but only partially recovered. About 60% of what had been transferred there, which is apparently typical, and which I've made a kind of peace with. The family court acknowledged the financial abuse as part of the proceedings, which mattered to me more than the money did, though let's understand that's a privilege to say. His mother contested a portion of the Canmore settlement. She lost. My husband now lives in a rented one-bedroom in Edmonton. I don't know more than that, and I haven't tried to find out. I moved back to Ontario in February. Faye was 8 months old. I packed our things into a rental van and drove it to my father's house in Oakville. And he stood on the driveway in the cold and took Faye out of her car seat and held her against his chest, and she grabbed his collar with both hands the way babies do. And he closed his eyes for a moment. We're staying in the house on Lakeshore while I figure out the next part. I've transferred back to a hospital in Hamilton. Faye has a room with yellow curtains that I painted the walls of myself on a Saturday in March while she slept in her bouncer on the floor. My father has dinner with us on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He learns a new Faye thing every visit. This week it was that she laughs when you blow raspberries on her feet, which he discovered and then did approximately 40 times in a row. He is not a demonstrative man. But he has never once, in 45 years of being my father, failed to show up when it counted. That's the thing about love when it doesn't announce itself. You see it most clearly in retrospect. In all the moments you almost missed it because you were looking the wrong way. I wasn't looking the wrong way anymore. Faye pulled herself to standing for the first time last week, gripping the edge of the coffee table, with both fists. Concentrating, with her whole face. He watched her do it and then looked at me and said, in the same quiet voice he uses for us most things, "She's going to be just fine." I knew he wasn't only talking about her.